welcome. I'm going to introduce Martha Page, and before I read this little introduction, just in the last few days, the Natural News listed the 3 top freshest cities in the country, and Hartford, Connecticut happened to be number 1. So, way to go, Hartford. So Martha Page is the executive director of the Hartford Food System, a nonprofit organization in Hartford devoted to issues of food security, defined as all persons being able to obtain a culturally acceptable, nutritionally adequate diet in their community from normal sources such as grocery stores and farmers markets. Ms. Page has a master's in public health from the University of Connecticut and brings that perspective to an organization that has a long history of policy advocacy and community organizing around healthy food access for all residents. Since 1978, HFS has been a leader in grassroots efforts to fight hunger and improve nutrition in Hartford's low-income neighborhoods. Help me welcome Martha Page.
Good evening, everybody. I'm really pleased to see that after a long day of workshops, this is a wonderful crowd, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you. Lorna talked about the Hartford's #1 designation. I'm not sure how many of you in the audience are familiar with Hartford, but we sometimes tend to, being one of the poorest cities in New England and in Connecticut, we sometimes tend to have a little bit of an inferiority complex about our city. So, #1, it was a designation by Ziploc, and we saw this. I saw this come through, and I wasn't exactly sure what was driving it, what the calculation was. But as it turns out, because Hartford has a pretty small footprint as a city, it's about 17 square miles, and it's got a relatively small population, it's about 125,000 people. We have a lot of farmers markets in the city. So one of the big determinants of this was what is the farmers market availability per person or something. So we scored really highly on that, and I'm delighted. And we actually have a role in that because it's one of the things we do. So I don't do a lot with pesticides, but I do a lot with healthy communities. And I think that these topics are extremely connected. And this is an organization, and I'll talk a little bit about the history of the organization. We've been at what we've been doing since 1978. I've actually been there as the executive director for only a couple of years, but I was on the board for more years than term limits would allow if we had term limits. So I've had a long association with the organization, including long association with the founding executive director, Mark Winnie, who is a national food policy expert and was at the organization for about 26 years before he moved on. So, as I just mentioned, we were founded in 1978, and the city at that time, the city of Hartford, there had been a mayor's blue ribbon task force on hunger, and this in Hartford Food System and a number of other initiatives that happened right around the same time was founded out of that concern. That was this was a city in a very wealthy state, in a wealthy county, but with high levels of poverty and a lot of issues around food access. And so the organization was founded on the basis of trying to do something about that, but not at the emergency level. There's a clear recognition in the organization, and we partner with a lot of different food-related groups in the Hartford area, a number of whom deal very clearly with emergency provision of food, and that there's a clear recognition about the importance of that. But where we have always worked is on the non-emergency side, to try to find the reasons why people don't have access to healthy food and to try to do programming, policy, and advocacy to solve some of those issues. And that's our mission. It's stayed relatively the same over, we've tweaked it now and again with some wording, but it's pretty much what it has been since the beginning of the organization. And we operate the programming that we do with a number of guiding principles, among them increasing access among low-income people to normal sources of food. One thing that is incredibly important to us is being able to deepen the connection between people and the sources of their food. And one way that we're doing that now, and I'll talk a little bit about our programming, we do a lot of farming in the city to try, and for a number of reasons, not only for food production, but to make sure that that connection between sources of healthy food, sources of healthily grown food, and the people that consume it are like, that's a very, very tangible thing that we do. Probably the least elegant thing that we do, but from my perspective and with a public policy and public health background, we do a lot of policy work, and it's slow. It doesn't always show immediate return, but for any of you who do policy work, you know that that's probably the key to long-term sustainability of solutions to the problems that face our communities. So let me tell you a little bit about Hartford. I mentioned already that it's got a small geographic footprint. It's about 125,000 people. It's the second largest, I think Bridgeport's the largest city in Connecticut. New Haven and Hartford go back and forth between being second and third, but none of the cities are very big. The population of the city is overwhelmingly non-Caucasian. More than 77% of the population is either Hispanic or African American or Black. We have a large West Indian population. There are a number of newly arriving populations, Burmese, Cambodian, Somali, Bosnian, and one of the things that we have noticed about a lot of the newly arriving populations is that many of them come from agrarian backgrounds, and so there's a very real interest in getting into the community gardening system or to work with us on finding ways to farm in the city. This is a high minority city in the midst of a county that is overwhelmingly Caucasian. And it's also a poor city. The median household income in Hartford County is somewhere around $64,000. In the city, it's less than $29,000. And for those of you who are familiar with New England, you know that towns have real meaning. So if you're in Hartford, you are not in West Hartford. I mean, it's so that donut hole exists in the midst of a very affluent county. And it's always had the dubious distinction of having one of the highest rates of child poverty in the country. It has improved in its standing over the last few years, but not because it's gotten any better, but because some cities have gotten worse. And so what comes with an economically challenged environment is a lot of health problems in the population. There's very high rates of diet-related diseases, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, what have you. Not a lot of high incidence of cancer relative to the rest of the population, because it tends to be the population of Hartford is younger than the county on average, and so some of the diseases that you see in an older population you don't see with the same prevalence in the city. It has a reputation of having a lot of urban stress and a lot of violence. Not all of it deserved. By the way, I'm a city resident and feel pretty safe living there, but it has this reputation. From a food perspective, we have a high population of that doesn't have private transportation, so a lot of people who don't drive. And the bus system is like a hub and spoke. So if you need to get to one side of the city to the other, you have to go downtown first to go someplace else. And there's one grocery store and one Walmart that sells groceries within the city. So if you want to go to a major supermarket, you have to go outside the city limits very often. There's a whole lot of mid-sized markets. When I was growing up, something that we would actually call a grocery store the old A&Ps and all that sort of stuff. You couldn't get your lawnmower there, but you could get, groceries. And there's a number of those that are in the city. As we mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of farmers markets, but we also have a lot of corner markets, a bunch of bodegas whose primary reason to be is snack food, booze, lottery tickets, and single cigarettes. But there's also our work with the community has indicated that there's a lot of interest in better food options, and that's what we find all the time, that just because people don't have a lot of money and they live in a stressed environment, that doesn't mean they don't want to put healthy food on the table for themselves and for their kids. So what are we doing about that? Grow Hartford is our premier program. Up until a couple of years ago, we had a 16-acre farm in a community, a suburban community, but we spun that off, and in order to focus more intensely on the work we were doing in the city. And Grow Hartford began as a youth, kind of like a youth development program, and so the agricultural piece of it was important but secondary to the youth development piece, but now we're kind of giving them both. We're growing both pieces of it. And this is in the last few years, we have not only increased the number of sites that we're farming in the city, we've increased the visibility of it within the city, and we've certainly increased the production. And we are not certified organic, but we grow with organic methods. It's no pesticides, and we do very much bring the community into the efforts that are underway. And the other piece of it, as I mentioned, is that part and parcel of our urban agricultural programming is bringing Hartford's youth, many of whom have never been exposed to where food grows, into the work that we do. And we're actually moving what we're doing even a little farther. It's always been like youth development, but within the last year, we've made the decision to try to actually do youth organizing around healthy food in the community. So we've kicked off an effort where we have a core group of 15, 16-year-old Hartford youth who we are asking to take a leadership role in figuring out what does healthy food mean to them and their community, and to help develop the message for their families, for their peers, and for younger youth in the city, with them taking the lead with our support rather than vice versa. The other thing that we do is we work with some of the markets that I was mentioning to try to get them to carry a better selection of groceries in general, but most particularly around healthy fruits and vegetables. There's an awful lot of the markets, like the ones I mentioned before, these little tiny places where that's really not a very good use of time, but there's some of the larger ones that have actually discovered, and this is a principle that we're trying to use more and more, is that healthy food can be good business. And so if you display it properly, if you have a proper selection of it, people are going to buy it. And if they buy it, you're going to make money on it. And if you're going to make money on it, you're going to sell more of it. So it's kind of, it's kind of a sustainable approach to trying to get retailers to do what we need for them to do for healthy food in the community, but in a way that makes it profitable for them to do so. We run a farmer's market. One of the farmers markets in the city, there are currently 6. There will be a 7th that is going to open up this summer. We are all run by different organizations, but within the last 2 years, we have formed a farmers market consortium called Hartford Farmers Markets, and the poster that you see in the center there is part of that consortium effort to try to do cross-promotion, cross-marketing. Our farmers market was opened in a section of the city this will be its 5th season, and it was, this is a section of the city that did not really have access to a farmers market. It has been increasingly successful year after year, and this year through the generosity of Wholesome Wave, we are going to be able to offer double value for SNAP and WIC usage at the market for the full season, so we're really very excited about that, as are our farmers, by the way. Okay. One of our very newest programs, we're calling it the North Hartford Community Kitchen. We started this in January, and this is our pilot year for it. We're running 2 concurrent sessions now, and we'll do 2 more in the fall, where we are doing cooking and communal cooking. And it's 16 weeks of programming based on the principle that if you do this together, it takes the mystery out of it, you have a lot of fun, and you begin to build food community. We have a couple of objectives for this. One of them is not only do we build do skill building around cooking, and that demonstrating that you can eat healthfully on a low-income budget, but that in fact, if we build the skills, and you might also build the demand, and if you build the demand, then you might also build a core of activism around the idea of access to healthy food in the community. We're a small organization. We've always been a small organization, so we need lots of hands to help us do our work. The most effective hands, of course, are the people in the community themselves, and so that's what we're trying to build with this. And it's also a lot of fun. And they get to eat every session, and they take home stuff, and the feedback we're getting from the participants is amazing. They simply love it. And as I mentioned before, we do policy work. Hartford Food System was one of the kind of like the driving forces behind the formation of what is one of the oldest municipal food policy commissions in the country. This has been around since 1991 and active all that time. Was established by city ordinance, and it is an advisory commission to the city, but Hartford Food System runs it on behalf of the city. And we have a very wonderful group of commissioners that are very, very dedicated to the topic of food and sustainability and food security in the city. It's a good group. Each year we make recommendations to city leadership about what things they should be thinking about. Our report for this year just came out, and it covers the range of increasing access to summer feeding programs to having the city consider doing incentives for businesses that engage in healthier behaviors around food. So businesses that sell healthier food, are there things that at the city level you can do about licensing or tax breaks or anything like that to encourage that type of activity? And we have challenges and opportunities. One of the things about working in a very small city is that, there's sometimes that can be frustrating because you sometimes don't have the degree of scale that might be helpful. On the other hand, like having a small city that you're working with, you can actually convince yourself that you can put your arms around the whole thing and that you might actually be able to do something that impacts an entire community. And so that's, it's both a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. But we do have, we have neighborhoods where the median household income is like less than $20,000. When your median household income in New England is less than $20,000, you're probably not thinking about the next big policy thing you're going to do. You're trying to think about how you're going to keep body and soul together. So that's a challenge as well. But we still believe very, very strongly that involving the community is the only way, and so even if it's tough and even if it's slow, then in fact, those are the only solutions that will last, are the ones that involve the community. So education and community organizing and community building are kind of like key tools in our toolbox. It has been over the last couple of years, and nobody in this room is probably unfamiliar with the changing funding environment, and we don't mean necessarily changing for the better. So it's like, there are challenges there. An uncertain political environment impacts the work that you're doing with pesticides, the work we're doing around food, the work that any of us are trying to do to build our communities in a healthy way. But on the positive side, there is such a power in the healthy and local food movement. I mean, we were talking in one of the workshops is that, is there a dichotomy between, the foodies and, you know, and getting healthy food to people who do not have like a lot of income. And I don't really view that as an either or. This is a big enough topic and a big enough movement to incorporate all of those pieces. Now, what we have to avoid is being exclusionary. So, you know, the people who can afford to, you know, only eat food that was grown within 50 feet of their front door or something like that, versus making sure that everybody is invited to that table in, like, you know, in one way or another. It's a good time to be in this topic. We have a lot of work that we're doing around trying to link this whole topic of food security and healthy food to economic development. It is good business, and it does create jobs. And one of the things that I have said in a number of settings recently is that the very best way to ensure that somebody can put healthy food on the table is if they have a job where they can afford to put healthy food on the table. So it's like, you know, so bringing up the economic and exploring the economic development pieces of this is something that we're focusing on. And we do see a greater sense of collaboration between topics. I'm not sure if 5 years ago there would have been the notion that organizations that were primarily thinking about pesticides and organizations that were thinking about food security would necessarily be seen as natural partners. And so I think that's a thing that's growing, and it certainly is very, very positive. So with that, that's all I have to say, unless you have.
Let's take about 10 minutes worth of questions, and let's start right here.
You touched on it in your talk, but you didn't really talk about your food-growing system that is your farm.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, we have 5 sites in the city that we farm. It is a total of about maybe around 2.5 acres. It's a combination of in-ground, because some of the sites, believe it or not, some of the city sites actually had they were not contaminated soil. That's not to say that they were soil that you could immediately grow in without a lot of amendment, but we also have our biggest site, or our newest site, is a very prominent site downtown at the corner of Park and Main Street. It's a city site. It was supposed to be a casino or a hotel or something like that. That's not really happening soon. So the city is permitting us to farm it. And there was a significant amount of contamination on that site. So we put in raised beds. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's just a lovely, the garlic is coming up that we planted there. And it is a wide variety of primarily vegetables. And we have some, in one of our sites, we have a hoop house, unheated space. We just received word a couple of weeks ago that from the state, from Ag Viability, we're going to be able to put a heated space on one of our sites. And so our goal is to try to be in some form of production for 10 plus months a year. And
who farms it?
we have an urban farmer who is the only other full-time member of the organization besides me, and we've got several part-time folks. And we bring in seasonal help. Our youth, during the time period they're with us during the summer, they also work, and they work in agriculture. And we also have a significant number of volunteers that come all the time and help us. So, but we have a primary farmer who actually is in charge of production.
I was going to take a few more questions, but Jay has suggested, since we are running way behind schedule, that we'll take some questions after our next speaker and see where we are then. Martha, thank you so much for all that you do.